The final incarnation, it would be different for everybody. And sometimes, you get very, very high spirits, like Jesus, for example, who incarnated for a job. Jesus was probably the greatest medium ever, and healer. And of course, in the Bible, it says that he was met on the road after he passed away. Physical mediumship, plain and simple.
I'm Dr. Yvonne Cason, the president of Spiritual Awakenings International. Welcome to Spiritual Awakenings International Presents. It is my great pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Leo Bonomo from the UK. Leo is a multiple spiritually transformative experiencer. He's been having experiences since childhood, which I'm certain he's going to be talking to us about today. He is regarded as one of the best psychic mediums in London in the UK. He hosts a popular weekly radio show and is the author of a wonderful book called The Voice of Spirit. Let us welcome Leo Bonomo.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for being here. This is a real privilege for me, and not only to be part of the SIA, but for being asked to speak. It's fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to look at the first slide, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how things came together for me. My first experience was when I was age 2. And it was my real connecting piece for my start of life. And I was walking with walking with my parents, and this was at a place called Manor Park in East London, and we'd just been to see some family, and I felt this energy, and I turned round and I could see some mist rising through the pavement. And as I watched, a gentleman just rose horizontally out of the ground and stood up and was just staring at me. So I thought this was great. It didn't faze me at all. And my dad asked me, what are you looking at? And I said, there's a funny man behind us. So we all turned, couldn't see him. We all turned back. I looked back again and I could see him again. And the only thing that bothered me was that he was dressed in Victorian clothing, which I'd never, ever seen before. To me, the experience of somebody appearing like that just seemed so very, very natural. And so that kind of kick-started my connection with spirit, or perhaps reconnection is a better word. So that's how that started. And it's been with me ever since. And I've been seeing spirit now for 63 years. I'm 65 years old. And it's been an absolute privilege. And I'll be hoping to enlighten you with some of the experiences and that I've had. So next. So slide 2, I was very privileged again to have been nominated by a client to Prestige Book Awards. And the thing was, I always try and keep ego under wraps. So I thought it was a joke. I honestly did. I thought it was a hoax. So I turned them down, and they wrote again, and I turned them down again, and this went on for a little while until I contacted them and found out that actually Prestige Awards is a worldwide thing, and they chose me in the south of England as the award winner and best clairvoyant. So something that you know, I appreciate, but I'm amazed. It's not the kind of award where the mediums are given. Very often mediums are not recognised. So for me, this is to be acknowledged in my field is an extra privilege for me. So that's something that I really, really do appreciate, and it was totally, totally unexpected. Okay, next. So this is a cover of my book, The Voice of Spirit. It has Leslie Flint's face on it. Leslie's the subject of the book, and Leslie was a direct voice medium. And direct voice is something that's actually very, very rare. There are some about, but Leslie was told before he passed, Leslie passed in 1994, that he would remain the greatest. He was the most tested medium in his lifetime, and certainly highly tested throughout the world, in the world. So that was something that for me was fantastic. And I joined Leslie. I was asked to be present at one of the seances, and the seances were conducted in light, and Leslie was actually awake. And so the book is based on those, and with the book are recordings as well. I'm really blessed to have known many mediums, including Robin Foy, who has passed to spirit himself recently, and Alexander Stewart, a physical medium, and they've both given long life service to spirit. One of my good friends, Anthea Turner, the actress and TV personality, also did a review. And to me, this is the kind of epitome of the knowledge and reassurance that we get. And what she actually said was, having read this amazing book of transcriptions, listen to the recordings, a real must-have. They are incredible. I am blown away. In one recording, there is a fairy tale ending in which a gentleman, after losing a loved one early, turned to a life of crime, is reunited, and the lovers live the life they could have had. It's a real Romeo and Juliet moment. And I know it's one of those things that people ask, you know, will we be reunited? And this becomes very clear in the book. Okay, so next. Now, this is a picture of myself when I was 6 or maybe 7 years old, and my eldest sister. And the interesting thing about this is that when I first saw the picture, my grandfather wasn't in it. And this appeared gradually after some time. And it's very clear. And I was actually born in 1957. And in the following slide, you will see a picture of my grandfather's tomb, and he died in 1933. So you can see from that picture that there is a real connection between myself and my grandfather. My grandfather came back to pose in that picture, and it's absolutely genuine, and I hope something that you enjoy, because there are not many photographs like that. Okay, next. And this should be, sorry, that should be, okay, sorry, I've misplaced the slide, so that's fine. Now, again, going to my first spirit when I was 2 years old, that kick-started everything for me. And from that point, I started to have wonderful, wonderful experiences with spirit appearing in my room, spirit manifesting, and physically walking around the room. And it brought me so many experiences. For example, there were times when a cupboard in the room would open and I could see through to what looked like a Victorian chamber, and there were people there. Once a small hand, very small, about 5 or 6 inches off the floor, pushed my bedroom door open, and songs would play. There would be all kinds of interaction, and it was a time when I really appreciated all of the experiences that I had. They are too many really to enumerate, but for example, I would be levitated at times. The covers would be snatched from me, and it gave me such a wide sphere of experience. So I have been lucky enough in my life to experience most things. And something else that happened was that I was woken one night and I realized that there was a trumpet, like a seance trumpet, moving around the room. And I wasn't sure whether I should stand up or sit up or not. And I sat up in bed and it hit me in the head, which promptly made me jump back under the covers, as I'm sure you would appreciate. So it wasn't something that was intended by spirit, but that happened. And again, wonderful experiences that continued on past the age of 10 or 12, when there was a short period because of puberty. Okay, next. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm out of sync here with, right, okay, yeah, I've got that. I do apologise. Now, Spirit tutored me. They showed me what the difference was between spirit and that truth and the dogma of religion. And so it was interesting for me to see those differences. And we all know that there are quite a few changes in the Bible and quite a few changes that are made for laws at that time, and politics, of course, got involved. But for me to see the difference between those was something that had really opened my eyes. I don't know if people are very aware, but there are a lot of priests that are mediums and certainly very, very psychic. And there is a blend of that. Okay, right. Just want to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so part of the experiences that I had was moving out of my body, and I used to at one point astral project at will. And so I could just imagine myself out of my body, or quite often I would feel as though I were running, for example, on a pavement, and I would dive and literally leave my body behind. And being something that I could do at will was a wonderful experience. And if any of you have had astral projection and visited the astral planes, or quite often we visit places on Earth, and that is something that I really, really enjoyed doing. I know that when you are out of your body, and there is that realization that you don't need your body as such, that you do exist without it, it's a transforming experience of itself. It is one of those things that really highlights that there is a difference between us and those and the body. It is, the body is in some senses quite limiting. Again, coming up to puberty, that closed down for a while. And the reason, in case anybody's wondering why that is. If you're very, very sensitive, then that's kind of one level. But if you're coming up for puberty, that can be a difficult period in anybody's life. So the two together, I wouldn't say exactly that they clash, but they certainly affect each other. And so my guides realized that perhaps that wouldn't be so effective for me, so they shut that down. So that closed for a couple of years. Some of the predictions still happened from time to time. And prediction is something that I'm quite fond of, because to me, you can get messages and you can appreciate those messages. But once you've had a prediction, certainly as a medium, then you understand that it's real. But predictions for people, I think, are something that are really helpful for them. My view on that is that you cannot, if you're cold reading somebody, or skeptics would say that you're cold reading someone, then there is no way that you can cold read a prediction. So I find those very, very useful. I've talked about some of those experiences, and I've also talked about predictions as being very, very important. There are many spiritually transformative experiences that we have, and as far as being clairvoyant, which is clear seeing, clairaudient, which is hearing, and all the senses that we have, including senses of smell, taste, there is knowingness, and just knowing that something's right. And during my development, spirits came to me very, very clear as I can see you, and you can see somebody else. And spirits will appear in different ways. And it depends on not just the circumstances, but how they want to appear. It may be interesting to know that I've stood in a room with 10 other mediums, and 4 or 5 of them saw spirits, and the rest of us were shielded. So they have very great control over over who they show themselves to. Dreams as well are very evocative, because the connection in dreams can either be predictive, but when we have real vivid dreams, very vivid dreams, that is a real connection with spirit. So if you're not mediumistic and you're not psychic, but you do have very vivid dreams, then that is one way of knowing that those dreams are a real connection with spirit. And it's a wonderful thing to have. You can tell whether they are very vivid, because not only is the content very vivid, the colours are very bright, the sounds are very bright, and it is a totally different experience to just a normal dream. And so over the years, as all these experiences have happened for me, whether it's been astral projection, cognitive experiences of all kinds, it really created that foundation for me. And that is something that really, really transformed and informed my life. And I became used to having that other side of life. And like so many people, there were times when I couldn't explain to people, my dad, for example, wasn't very into this, although strangely, he was a twin and he had twin experiences. So it wasn't something that I could talk about, but I was reassured by spirit and was very, very at ease with it. Now, in that, there are also, under the guidance of my guides, negative or dark things that happen. So can we look at the next slide, please? And one of the experiences was of a gentleman. Now, he appeared in my dad's room, and we gradually got to talk to each other. And this spirit seemed okay. And what happened was he started to take over. So this was trance at first, but then physically manifesting within me. And that went on for some time. But what started to draw my attention was that my arms started to warp and become very immovable when he came. So I decided to test this because there was something that was wrong. And one of the things that I did was I stood next to my wardrobe and I scraped a knife across the top of my head. And he went, and in the morning I checked, and the mark on the door was at the height of 6'1". Now I'm 5'7". I was 5'8" at my tallest. So that showed to me that not only had he physically appeared and transformed my body, so I knew that that was absolutely correct, but it also made me think about the connection with him. So what I did, I decided to test it out on our cat because they're very, very sensitive animals. And I thought, well, I can't tell anyone else, so I'll try that. So what I decided to do was the next time that the gentleman came forward, I would go find the cat. And when I did this, we had wood chip wallpaper, which I'm sure some of you know from years back. It's just paper with bits of wood in it. And I opened the bedroom door, and as was apt, the cat was on the landing, and it took one look at me, and its back arched, and it ran not only up the wall, but across the ceiling to get away from me. So that was a big indicator for me that there was something that was not nice there. And what that resulted in was that my guides and doorkeeper mentored me in how to protect myself from negative spirits and negative kinds of happenings. So for them, it was very much a controlled situation. And they waited to see how long it would take for me at that fairly young age to understand something wasn't right. So it was a great piece of experience for me, kind of self-training in a sense. Okay, next slide, please. My formal training was at the highly regarded Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, the SAGB as it was known. And this again is another fascinating stories. I've been blessed throughout my life with these kinds of experiences. And I had a dream one day of a gentleman called Robert Brown, who's a very well-known medium. And I didn't know he was real. And in the dream, he told me that I needed to go to the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, that I needed to find a tutor, which I did, a lovely lady called Jerry March, and begin my formative training. And that resulted really in me finding out, did the SAGB really exist? And I found out, to some surprise, that it did. I found out that Jerry March also existed. And so I went down there and tried to enlist. And the first time I applied, I couldn't get in Jerry's class, but they said, well, there's another gentleman here called Robert Brown. So he also proved to be real. And it's wonderful when you have connections like that, and spirit can really, they can never, ever take away your free will, but they can place these things in front of you. And of course, from spirit, before I was born, I had agreed to this path and these particular experiences. So it was wonderful to find that that was all coming into play. And so I joined the SAGB, and that would have been during the mid-80s up to the early 90s. I was there about 8.5 years. And it was wonderful training. I was very privileged, not only because some of the greatest mediums that were around at that time worked there, but I was also the very, very first trainee medium to give private sittings. And so that kind of paved the way for me and certainly boosted my confidence. And so that those were very, very helpful. There was a board meeting, and I was asked to be president. There was a vote, an annual general meeting, and there was a vote, and I was asked to be president. But I held back on that because ego just wouldn't let me step into those shoes. So, but I did become a member of the board for a short time. And again, looking back, a great privilege for myself. And I want to talk a little bit about my very first demonstration. So can we have the next slide, please? My first demonstration, again, was interesting. I used to go and visit spiritualist churches and watch the mediums, and I did that from time to time, as much to learn as anything else, because watching mediums of all different kinds and ages and stages is a great learning experience. And my guide said to me one day, next week at this particular church, the medium's not going to turn up. So I just thought, well, this I have to see. I need to check whether it's correct. And I think we should all check what guides and those in spirit tell us. So I went along and was sitting in the audience, and the chairperson got up and said, well, we have an announcement. The medium hasn't turned up. Are there any mediums in the audience? Well, Spirit pushed my hand up straight away. I was quite shocked, I have to say. And she said, are you a medium? And I said, yes. I had been training there for a good many years before that. And so that was my first demonstration from that was the very first demonstration, sorry. And from there, really, it just kick-started. And as you can, imagine, the rest is history. That demonstration went very, very well. And it emphasized to me how close a connection with spirit we should all have. And I think mediums are particularly privileged. But it just shows what they can do and how things can be moved along. So it was very much an experience, not just the first demonstration, but an experience of how spirit can work with our will, not against it, and just make those suggestions to us. And I think that's a very important point. They cannot take away our free will. In that case, and other cases, of course, we have agreed those before we've come here. So what it can be is either very gentle or quite a forceful, quite a forceful reminder that, hey, this is what you agreed to. So I really, really enjoyed that. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about inspirational writing and automatic writing. And many mediums have the impression of words and sentences, sometimes songs, poems, that they write down. And this was something that was there for me for a great number of years. Again, something that gave me great joy, just to see what had been written. Like most mediumistic encounters when a message is given, mediums don't remember very much of it at all. So there is just this feeling of something being given and emerging from us, and there is a blank. So I was impressed with words and would begin to write down. And that ended up in a book called A Book of Thoughts. And the Book of Thoughts was, I think, about 54 pages of thoughts and inspirations from Spirit. And that was something that I was quite proud of. Wasn't going to do anything with that. It was many, many years later that kind of showed itself in that way. But it enabled them to control me to get that process there. Okay. And from there, my first book, Summerland, was written. So next slide, please. Now, the reason and the real connection between Summerland, the book, was that many, many years before that, Summerland, the poem, was written. And it was filed away in a desk, and didn't really have any connection with me. Now, I'm sure you've all seen the film Ghost, when the character is singing, "I'm Henry VIII, I am." Something very similar happened to me. And so I kept getting words and sentences, and, it being 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, when you've got to get up at 7, it's not really something you want to do. So I kept pushing them away. But it got to the point where I realized the only way to make this stop was to physically get up, write the thing down, and have done with it. And with Summerland, when I began to write, I physically became unconscious, completely out of it. And so what happened then was automatic writing. So as I became unconscious, the spirits took my hand and the pen and began writing. And that again was an experience from the point of view of being completely out of it. And when they had finished, they would wake me up and I would read back what was written. And sometimes it was simply a few words. Sometimes there were pages of writing. And the original manuscript was written on all kinds of writing, all kinds of paper, backs of envelopes, you name it. And so it was quite haphazard in a way, but I was told to store those away. And that's what I did. And the book that's resulted from that, Summerland, is quite an unusual book in many, many ways. It's written simply enough for children to understand, but it is an adult's book. And it's about a young boy called Alex just prior to his passing and after, and what he finds in spirit. And he goes to the Summerland. Summerland is perpetual summer. And everything is perfect, as you would imagine, in Summerland or heaven. So for me, if I like 30 degrees heat and you like 20 degrees heat, we can be standing in the same space, but it's perfectly warm for you and perfectly warm for me. So there are many, many wonderful things in Summerland or heaven. They call it Summerland, and that's the name that I really prefer to stick to. So with Alex's adventures and experiences, he learns something about the lower planes. He learns something about the universities and plays and life in Summerland. There is work, which may surprise some of you, but it's certainly spiritual work, and there are all kinds. And because we don't expend energy in the same way, the way that we rest, if that's the right word, in spirit is we change occupation, so we'll go and do something else. But the knowledge that we can access there is absolutely incredible. And you can learn, for example, if you want to become a dancer, you can learn that. There are plays there which are hugely popular, and the plays are mainly historical, but with the people of the time, the real people that were there involved. And all this propaganda is stripped away, so we can learn what physically truly happened at those times. So Alex talks about those kinds of things. From the first time that I heard Jimi Hendrix's music, I realized that he was a medium. From the very first song, it just happened. And there is an affinity between Jimi and myself. And in the book, there was a passage about Jimi Hendrix and his music, which the Hendrix Foundation were quite against. They thought it would tarnish his image, etc. But Janie, Jimi's stepsister, and his brother Leon, and many other musicians, Eric Clapton and Santana, as well as Jimi, in interviews which were then released, talked about spirit. So it was 10 years before, 10 years after that first approach, and they said yes, it was fine. And that's how that got into the book. And it covers the Ouija board, it covers not just life in the spheres, but how mediums interact and connect with those of us on Earth. There's also a small reincarnation and a small chapter about cot death and the meaning behind that. So it's a very informative book, and it is something that when people read it when it first came out, they said that they started to have connections with their parents and lost a loved one. So something in the book is very special. And I'm not saying that as an author. I do try to keep ego down, but those reactions were certainly prevalent when it was first released. About 25% of people wrote back and said that had happened. So that was something else as well. In the book, there were various predictions, not just about new series and more films about spirit, Ghost, for example, coming through. And if I remember correctly, the book was written either just before or just after Ghost came out. That book, finally published in 2014, was written in 1987. So Spirit were very, very patient, as they can be. Okay, next slide, please. Something I love as much as giving messages and seeing that reaction on people's faces is teaching. And I love teaching mediumship. I love that same kind of connection with people, with students. And as strange as it may seem, I had skeptics in the class from time to time. And I think even more so when they were getting images or bits of messages and they were accepted by other members of the circle, their reaction to me was fantastic. It was obviously meant to happen, but to see that change, that recognition of, oh my God, it's real, you know, and that is something that I love. And I think with mediumship, you know, when the message hits home, especially for somebody that either in desperation or education doesn't believe this is real, when there are parts of evidence given that nobody else could have give, it starts that process. And I think that is wonderful. Sometimes people ask, what is the purpose of spirit communication? And the soul, no pun intended, so it's just my guide intervening then. The sole purpose of it is to let us know that there is something else. And of course, that this is real. So I find that interesting. You do find also that there are some wonderful demonstrators of mediumship that don't have the same ability in teaching. And you have those that are very talented teachers that are perhaps not so good demonstrating. So it's kind of rare that you get people, and there are a few of them around, that are exceptional, both as demonstrators and as teachers. And it's very important. Sometimes, you know, there's a lot that goes on in the background when you're teaching. And one of the examples that I give is, if you've got 10 students, I'm looking after my guides, I'm looking after their guides, I'm looking after their communicators, and a good teacher will see the links. And it's not just the communicator, it's how the communicator gives that information to the student and how the student collates that and makes sense of it. And quite often when we're new, we don't join the dots properly. So it's very important for a teacher to be able to see the message that's given, see how it's interpreted, and more importantly, see how it's delivered, because there's a real technique and ability in combining those three things. Okay, next. Okay, so we're on slide 16, and this is about reincarnation. And someone asked me fairly recently about reincarnation and what happens. And the way that my guide explained it to me was, if you can imagine a diamond with 1,000,000 facets, and a facet breaks off and becomes reincarnated, and sometimes there are 2 or 3 that would incarnate in different periods. And we live that life and we have those experiences, and then we pass and we stay in what's called reflection by spirit. So that's basically heaven, where we reflect on what we've done, how we've acted, how we've interacted with people. And then once we get past reflection, which normally takes a few hundred years, we go back, or that facet goes back to the soul, and then there's more, if you like, that are ejected or shed and reincarnate. And the wonderful thing about that is, it's the soul gaining all this experience. And for people to understand that we live in a multi-dimensional universe. So we can not only incarnate here on Earth, but we can incarnate in different places as well. And the way my guide explained to me about reincarnation is, if you imagine a sphere, let's just call it Earth, and you want to incarnate, let's say, Australia. And if you imagine a line going through that, which is literally a timeline, and you want to pick a timeline, and you want to go to 1870 in Australia, and then you can incarnate in that. People tend to think that incarnations are forward-looking. So we die now, next time we incarnate, it's in the future. There is no real time in spirit, none at all. All time is in the same space. And this is why, if you imagine that sphere and this line again, that we can pick a particular point and incarnate into that. So we could, from this life, for example, incarnate into Tudor England and have that experience there. Reincarnation is a fascinating thing. So if we go to slide 17, that also shows reincarnation and all the parallel universes. Science tells us that at least 90% of the universe is unknown. But of course, we know that's not true. So when we're looking at multiverses, all piled one on top of each other, occupying the same space, it's an enormous amount of opportunity that can be given. Opportunities for all kinds of experiences. And, people also ask about Summerland and how is that stacked. And most people know that there are 7 basic levels, getting to the highest, if you like, and maybe getting to the lower regions or the shadow regions. But between those, there are millions and millions and millions of layers. And the way that my guide explained this to me was, if you lived in Switzerland all your life, then when you passed, you would need to find something familiar. So you would be in a place that was very recognizable as Switzerland, obviously slightly different because it is Summerland. But you would have that experience. And if you had somebody that lived in the Sahara Desert and they passed, they would find themselves in very familiar surroundings of the desert. So if you think of things like that, and you can see then that for, the 8.5 billion of us that are here, not even remembering all the people in history who's ever passed, you can see that there are lots and lots of layers. So between those layers, between those stages, if you like, of 7 stages, there are billions and billions of combinations of existences that we can have, and the experiences when we pass over and where we find ourselves. What we do and think, who we literally are, shapes where we go. And it is done automatically. It's a fascinating mechanism. Is the word my guys just give me. It's a fascinating mechanism. Okay. Right. Slide. Next slide, please. Okay. So people ask, are our loved ones going to greet us on the other side? And the short answer to that is yes. And sometimes people ask, well, what if they reincarnate? They tend not to for the first 300 or 400 years because they will stay within Summerland. They often want to meet us and experience us again and that reunion. So that certainly happens. Okay. Next slide, please. Most people think about mediums as being clairvoyants. There are many, many, many different types of mediums. Different mediums have different skills. Some are clairvoyant, some are physical mediums, some are trance mediums. There are psychic surgeons who work with energies. One thing most people don't understand, and I've actually met a few mediums that don't understand this either, all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics are mediums. And the difference really is a psychic reads energy, would read your energy, your aura, the vibrations around you. Confusingly, exactly the same information can be given, but it comes from a different source, and it really is as simple as that. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so the book is about Leslie Flint, who was the greatest direct voice medium ever. His ability was extraordinary. In the end, Leslie would be wide awake, joining in with a conversation. And with physical mediumship, what happens is they take ectoplasm and they form a voice box. And at the end of that voice box, it's slightly changed now because things are forever developing in spirit. But there's a mask which they press their faces into and send their thoughts into, which are ejected as sound. So in a very, very short way, that's how that works. Direct voice, or more correctly called independent direct voice, is away from the medium. And in Leslie's case, it appeared 6 or 7 inches under the ceiling, sometimes 10, 12 feet away from him. And as I say, Leslie would also join in with that. The voices could actually be quite loud as well. So very, very, very interesting to experience. There are some direct voice mediums developing, and there are some good results, but again, they're still rare. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now Ellen Terry was a famous British actress that was that came through Leslie and her and the circle, and she described some of the inner worlds with her. The communications have been available to millions of people, so there is, hopefully you can see on the slide, that connection. And there is this statement that she makes: here is complete unity and harmony and love. Here is truly brotherhood. Here is the wisdom of all time expressed in a manner of ways by all manners of people, irrespective of any earthly ideas of class or creed or colour. And I think we're going to hear that short clip.
Here there is complete unity and harmony and love. Here there is truly brotherhood. Here there is the wisdom of all time, expressed in all manner of ways by all manner of peoples, irrespective of any earthly idea of class or creed or colour.
During his lifetime, there were over 6,000 different seances through Leslie Flint, and many, many different characters. There are some, of course, which are very famous for all kinds of reasons. My personal favourites are those of the ordinary man, if that's the correct way of putting it. I just love those. Queen Victoria came through in one of those sessions, and it was very impressive because she'd obviously been through before, and somebody, Mrs. Betty Green, who was in the circle, recognised her and said, "Is that Queen Victoria?" And the very, very telling answer came back: "I am Victoria, Queen no longer." And it absolutely dispels those thoughts and egos that people may have of being in politics or power or super rich, thinking that when they get over, they are going to inherit the same thing. Joining spirit is a huge leveler. It really shows us that we are spirit first and foremost, that are having human experiences, and that ego has no place on the other side. And there are lessons, I think, for all of us to learn there, certainly for myself. Okay, next, please. A question that is often asked about mediums and spirits and the communication is, why does that happen? There is only one reason, and that is to show that we exist, that communication is possible, and that we shouldn't have to fear death. Spirits often will talk about passings, and the body has a natural way of anaesthetizing pain. And one of the ways you can tell if you're fairly seriously injured is if there's no pain. And their experiences of passing that you can hear through the book, The Voice of Spirit, and the connecting transcripts and recordings, is that you can hear these expressions. If we go to people that have been there, are there, and talking about their experiences, there's no better way. So that is the reason why spirits communicate. They want to let us know that they do exist, that it is real, that we are real, and that this life is but a brief illusion. And that, in a sense, is all we need to know. Next slide, please. Okay. One of the someone I was reading for was quite concerned about death, about passing, about pain, and my guides quite unusually stepped forward and addressed her directly. It is a question, of course, that people, it's been created by religions. Why, what happens when we die? And my guide said to her, "My child, why are you afraid of dying? You were never afraid of being born. You are just going through a door that you simply came in through. So you're just going back out that door." And I thought that was a wonderful message that my guide gave her. There is, next slide, please. There is much more to life than we can know. And we can, on leaving the body, again, it's a painless experience, we can begin to understand the vastness, not just of the worlds that the Creator, the energies have created, but that all is truly well. We've all died before, we've all been born before, so that is something we need to bear in mind. Next slide, please. One of the things that underpins this communication is that we can all hopefully learn to live our lives better, to be good to each other, tolerant, and learn to see God in everyone. Instead of the mentality of I can have what you want and the violence occurs, it is not something that we should abhor. In fact, spirit are disappointed is a good word, because in a mental sense, although it's changed now with the quickening of vibrations, generally we have not changed our attitude in the last 3,000 years. And that's something to lament, I think. Okay, last slide, please. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful quote. There are similar ones from Spirit, but it's from Harry Potter, and it's attributed to Dumbledore. And he says, "After all, a well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure." And it's often spoken about in those terms. We are here, as Jimi Hendrix said, but for the blink of an eye, and we have eternity to enjoy and explore. May I thank you for that, and hopefully it's something that you've enjoyed. I'm sorry about the glasses and the glare there, but I hope that that's something that you have enjoyed. It has been my privilege. There is so much more to tell you, but thank you all very, very much.
And now we are going to see our questions. One of the questions that we have is a question about how do you do this day in and day out? Leo, is it hard for you to come back and forth from the inner worlds to the outer worlds?
No. I speak to mediums sometimes, you know, and they've been demonstrating or they've had a workshop all day and they're absolutely exhausted. For me, I think if you work the right way, not only do I get healing from it, but that residue of energy there leaves me buzzing. It's a natural high. And so I don't get exhausted. I just get energized.
Well, I think that you being energized is amazing. That whole presentation was awesome. The energy in the room was just tremendous. I felt myself a little bit more aware just listening to you. I have something else to ask you now. Lily asked, everyone talks about how we all have been here before. And at some point, surely we must be new to living in a body. Where are those new souls? What about that?
Okay, thank you, Lily. It's a brilliant question. It's actually answered in the book Summerland. And one of the things is, you know, when we're born into the body, we're very used to it, but the body is very heavy, it's very clumsy. And a simple explanation of that my guide gave was just how long it physically learns to walk and control the body. So when new souls come into a body, quite often it's a short stay. So there is that phenomenon we call cot deaths, and they're here for a while, they try it out, that's okay, they go back to spirit, and then we come back and we have a little longer and go back and so forth. So it is a slow process for souls that have never been human before. There are many worlds and dimensions and planets where we can incarnate. So it is slightly different for those, but for Earth, certainly, it's a slow process. Hopefully that's answered that for you, Lily.
That was great. Leo, there's a quick question. Was there anybody else in your family who manifested this gift of mediumship?
I only recently found out about 10 years ago that on my mum's side, there were mediums, and on my dad's side, there were mediums. So it was kind of a revelation to me. I know that sounds strange because we're expected to know everything, but we're hidden from a lot of it ourselves. We tend not to get messages for ourselves. So.
Well, someone else is saying it's really nice. Oh, it's Tamara saying it's finally nice to hear your story. Fantastic job. And she's saying, now I know why we are friends. She's really glad to be a part of your life. She said there's so much of your story that is similar to hers. So she just thanks you for this presentation. And our next question is, Marina was surprised when you explained that when we reincarnate, we can go back in time. Is that what you meant? Is that something that happens? Do most people go forward? Wouldn't going backward be a lot more difficult? What did you actually mean by that?
The process, whether we incarnate into the same period and kind of an instant reincarnation back on Earth, or forward or back, the process is the same. The facts, in spirit, there is no time. Time only exists for us here as a way of measuring. So the process is no different at all. We just think this will be an interesting experience and incarnate into Egypt, for example.
Well, another question is, can you give more insight into your spiritual guides and spiritual guides in general?
I work a slightly different way. I have 5 or 6 normal guides, if that would make sense. Mediums tend to have more, but when I teach, there's a selection of around 40 or 50 that just step in, and they would specialize maybe in color readings or healing, and they would take the lesson. So I'd physically be removed from it in trance, and they would speak. But there's about 40 or so.
So someone is asking a more complicated question. If we reincarnate to any date, doesn't that change the Akashic records? Is that, again, what you meant? Just explain it one more time.
Yes, it is what I meant. We have to look at it from Spirit's point of view, and they don't look at this particular time and that particular civilization. They say, what experience do you want? And it is as simple as that. And the Akashic records, you know, they're all written. I mean, they're updated, of course, but they're all written. So our choices are made from that.
Well, there's a question also, Leo, about incarnating on other planets. And could you discuss that with us?
Yeah, again, it's simply a choice. When I was first born, for the first couple of years, I was not a happy person. I didn't want to be here. I just wanted to go back. Felt it was not my choice, which of course it is, we realised later. But I have a very, very strong connection with the star group of Orion and those beings that are there. So, you know, for us here, it seems very, very strange, you know, why would we want to go to Neptune or wherever? But when we're there, we have a much greater capability and scope. And for us, again, simply, it's what kind of experience do I want?
Well, I actually missed Tamara's question before. I'm going to share it now. She asked you, Leo, what is your ultimate vision for the book Summerland? What does Spirit want this book to accomplish? And what do you want to see happen with this knowledge?
Oh, fantastic question. Summerland was written to be enjoyed by as many people as possible. In Summerland, there are lots of predictions. All but one, which was a silly one, but all but one have come true. And the one that hasn't come true yet is for Summerland to be made into a film. But that is going to happen. That's well underway. It's been underway for 3 or 4 years now. And that's simply to bring it to a bigger audience. You know, we can only do so much on a platform, but if the film comes out, hopefully millions can see it. So that was the whole purpose. I later found out. I didn't realise till a lot longer, you know.
That was good. There's a question here. There's some of us who believe that, you know, once we finish our incarnations on the earth plane, you know, that we go into the higher worlds and we can serve there. What's your opinion on that? What do you think is the final incarnation?
The final incarnation, it would be different for everybody. And sometimes, you know, you get very, very high spirits, like Jesus, for example, who incarnated for a job. Jesus was probably the greatest medium ever. And healer. And of course, you know, in the Bible, it says that he was met on the road after he passed away. Physical mediumship, plain and simple. It's, you know, it's not rocket science in that sense. But when we feel that we have had enough, and we do have some choice to this, a great degree of choice, we say enough. And then we learn an awful lot and we purify in spirit. And as we purify, if you can imagine one plane where we have this body, which is much lighter in spirit, and then there is almost a shedding of a garment, and it's a very quick process, and we simply blend with the next level. And we can go one level up. We can't stay there too long because the vibration doesn't suit us, but we can go 2 or 3 levels back. So it's simply moving up. It's like taking off a very light garment and that's it, and we're at the next level. It's infinite, you know, eternity truly, and none of us understand what that is, but yeah.
Well, there's another question that's interesting. I thought that slide, you know, of the negative entity would bring up some questions. And this person, Mark, is asking, you mentioned the negative energy and the white light, and what is the best way to shield ourselves when we move into a different dimension, or is it really getting rid of fear? And any method that works for you that you want to share?
I mean, fear in a sense is not bad. You know, if we weren't afraid of a fire, we'd just put our hands in and see what it was like. But the way that my guides taught me was, if there was anything wrong in a house, for me personally to sort of feel where the energy was. But what they described was painting brilliant white light. So imagine as brilliant a white light as you can, and coat the walls with it, the floor and the ceiling, and then go, it's like mastic, along where the joins are, and create a sealed box. So you would do that for each room. You would do that for the bathroom, the hallway. If there's a large cupboard in the room, I tend to do that as a single unit as well. And what works, if you're being troubled by bad dreams and unwanted connections, you can also do this before you go to sleep. I wouldn't do it every night for months and months on end, because it will close you down. You'll be completely separated. So it's very, very powerful. And what my guide suggested was, if you do that, it may last for weeks. If you do get a slight intrusion coming back, you just do it again and you renew it. It keeps them all out, including our guides, but our guides are outside protecting us. And I've cleansed houses with that, some that have been quite disturbed. One couple were actually on a cast iron bed and it was moving around the room like it was on skates. And I cleared that house, same method, but it's not something you should dabble with.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Why can't we remember our prior lives is the question, but I have to say, some of us do remember our prior lives. So please address that.
We do. Well, again, there's a great friend of mine, Sarah Tyler Waters. Her guide, Master Chow, was asked during a demonstration how many lives he'd had. Now, he'd had over 18,000. So again, if you think of the Earth's time, we can't get 18,000 lifetimes in, 410. But of course, he's moving about in the past. Some of them were very short. I forgot the question. I do apologize.
Well, it's about whether we can remember our past lives, or which ones we can remember, and why some people remember them and others don't, perhaps.
The basic instruction about remembering them is to give us our own experience of other lives. And of course, there is something else, and that proof comes up. If you can imagine, let's say 10,000 lives, and you incarnated and you walk down the road and you remember a person that you, for whatever reason, murdered in that life. You pass somebody else who may have murdered you. If the hard drive is not wiped clean, you'd literally be insane. And, did you learn from those lives from an earthly point of view? No. So it's wiped and we enjoy, if that's the, sorry, my guy's making me laugh. We enjoy this life kind of fresh.
There was a particular past life that I remembered, and I knew that I remembered it because it was a warning to me. So I believe we remember those that we do need to remember for whatever reason. You agree?
Absolutely. I did a reading for a lady, and again, I only remember because I learned from it and can pass the knowledge on. And I said to her, I can see her running. She was a female in the same in that existence, and I could see dogs running. There were torches, and there was a whole crowd chasing her, and the dogs were beginning to catch up, and she was faced with a fast-flowing river. And I said, there's no choice. It's the dogs or the river. And she jumped in. Her exclamation mark was, oh, my God, I've had an irrational fear of dogs and fast-running water, and it cleared. So, these things can be cleared in different ways. And that was a lesson for me. It never happened before, but I learned something every day.
Well, this is a parallel universe question next. Can we be aware of running simultaneous lives?
Some people can, and there's a real purpose behind that, but actually it's not common to do that. There is that separation for a reason.
Well, a lot of the people who are listening to you today are very talented, very high-level beings, and so I'm sure they're capable of doing all sorts of things, but that might get a little confusing if we're running. In fact, what we want is, when we're doing parallel lives, we want to go to the highest
yes.
right? And live from that point of view. So
absolutely. Yeah, I'm still struggling in this one.
Yeah. Clara says, someone said that in this universe, Earth is the only planet with free will. What's your opinion of that?
No. There are many planets with free will. And just here, there are people that incarnate with wanting to experience if you like, the dark side and those experiences. And for want of a better explanation, they may want to incarnate here to be very free with sex and different, and just experience that kind of life. And it's never really changed throughout what we call our history. So people, sometimes, you know, you may be a very high level spirit, but you want to incarnate into another body and have a different experience. I've found people that that have great disabilities are often highly spiritual people. And what they do is they incarnate because they are giving a karmic effect to people, so that they are placing themselves completely in their hands. They're at their mercy, and it can be a repayment of a karmic debt either way. And so those people have the choice of treating them properly. Unfortunately, you know, we do read in hospitals and care homes that people that are in that position greatly abuse people, but they're there out of love. And I find those, you know, people that often very low in different ways, they're the greatest human beings, wonderful spirits.
Yes, ultimately, as your last slide said, everything is about love, isn't it, Leo?
Absolutely. And, you know, from a spirit point of view, it's just, well, it's a brief blink of an eye. Let's try that. So, you know, we here look at it in a very different way to the truth.
Okay, so there's another question. There was a question about the clairs. What was the clairs?
You've got clairvoyance, seeing, clairaudience, hearing, clairolfactoriance, which sounds like a hairspray, but it's the sense of smell and taste, because those are very important in readings. Oh God, you know what? I'm going to embarrass myself now. I can't remember, but there's oh God, there's sight, there's knowing, there's prediction, which is slightly different to knowing. There's the seeing, smelling, hearing, and touch, of course. The
real part of that question is, how do we develop those talents or skills or awarenesses if we don't have them now? Is that possible?
Yeah, everybody's psychic to one degree or another. Most people can develop mediumship. It is an enhancement of sixth sense, gut sense, you know, whatever you want to call it. And when you begin to develop, and you should develop with a good teacher in a good class, when you begin to develop, spirit will begin to show you things and enhance those. So for example, when you're starting to get clairvoyance, seeing, at the very edge of your vision, you sometimes see dark or black shadows, and people think they're evil. They're not. But as your clairvoyance improves, they come from around towards the center, and they may show themselves as misty or solid as you and I, and in full color when they're directly in front of you. So clairvoyance, everything we do is on a scale. But for example, there's actually two types of clairvoyance, and this goes with everything. There is the clairvoyance where you can see in the mind. You can see the images, you can see the people, but true clairvoyance is seeing spirit people outside of your body, as solid as you and I can see each other. And it's the same for all the clairs. They'll begin to develop in different ways. And I think sometimes people are surprised at smell, taste and touch. But to explain that, sometimes you've only got to smell something or taste something. It'll take you back to a particular year, a particular memory, and the experience that you were having then. And for spirit to kind of introduce that, and that comes through the medium, and the recipient understands that, it just takes them back to that world and that connection. They know that's absolutely right. So everything we do is important. With touch, I work in a slightly unusual way. If somebody, for example, in spirit comes along and they're wearing a pocket watch, I can ask for the pocket watch, and I can pick it up, feel it, examine it. It's not really taught. through mediumship. I don't know why, to be honest with you. But so we can use all those facilities. Your mind limits how you can work. And if you're told, well, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do, you create barriers. And for mediumship, there should be no barriers. Everything is possible.
So perhaps the desire and the openness is what you're saying, Leo.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's there for us if we're open to it, as you say.
But of course, not everyone can be an opera singer. They can sing their little song, but they're not going to be an opera singer. And we understand that you're regarded as the finest medium in all of Great Britain by some. And yet you appear very humble. Everyone is saying on this chat room, you're very humble. And I don't know how you live with yourself sometimes with all that talent, but maybe you want to address that.
I think it's important to keep ego under control. We need a certain amount to get up on platform and, you know, to be able to speak. So it is important. It's very important to keep it under control. It doesn't matter if you're the greatest medium and you get the greatest evidence. If spirit go, that's enough, we lose it. We can do nothing without spirit, and we have to bear that in mind. It's, you know, people think that being a medium, it's great. You earn loads of money, which you don't. You know, you get lots of help from spirit. So we know all the pitfalls, we don't. But we need to understand it's a heavy responsibility, because if we put people wrong, we've got a pardon the pun, a hell of a price to pay when we get over, more than other people. And it's something we should bear in mind.
Well, we also wondered about reincarnation. Do you want to address that briefly in terms of if you're a medium and you reincarnate, do you take those skills with you? Is that how some mediums are so much better than others?
We kind of make a shopping list, for want of a better word. When we incarnate, for example, we can say, well, I want this skill and that skill. I want to learn about control. So I'm going to have a vicious temper and a weakness for drink, because that will make the temper, you know, the effects much more great. So we pick what we want. If we're coming here to be a medium, then we will choose various skills and talents that we can have. But it's all a mix. You know, people sometimes forget that mediums are human too, and we feel things to a much greater extent. I wouldn't say it's a burden, but it's not straightforward. But, you know, I've often been told I shouldn't say this, but the ideal situation is everyone could be a medium. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need mediums at all, because we have our own connection to guides. And I've been told off a few times for saying that, but I believe it's true. It'll make the world a better place, sorry.
I agree totally. I think that is something to say, because I think it's a part of your purpose is to teach us that there's more to life than we might know, right?
Absolutely.
That's what you said. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Leo, I want to thank you. I think we're at the end of the hour with the questions and answers. If there aren't any other questions, I just want to say how much I personally appreciated this. I know you and I got to talk. I experienced a death in the family recently, and I was so impressed with the insights that you shared with me and my husband. It was just phenomenal. We could hardly believe how astute and aware you are. And I know many people would benefit from that kind of service. So thank you for the service that you're providing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.